In music, serialism is a method or technique of composition that uses a series of values to manipulate different musical elements. Serialism began primarily with Arnold Schoenberg's 12-tone technique, though some of his contemporaries were also working to establish serialism as a form of post-tonal thinking. 12-tone technique orders the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, forming a row or series and providing a unifying basis for a composition's melody, harmony, structural progressions, and variations. Other types of serialism also work with sets, collections of objects, but not necessarily with fixed order series, and extend the technique to other musical dimensions, such as duration, dynamics, and timbre. The idea of serialism is also applied in various ways in the visual arts, design, and architecture, and the musical concept has also been adopted in literature. Integral serialism or total serialism is the use of series for aspects such as duration, dynamics, and register as well as pitch. Other terms, used especially in Europe to distinguish post-Euro World War II serial music from 12-tone music and its American extensions, are general serialism and multiple serialism. Composers such as Arnold Schoenberg, Anton Webern, Alban Berg, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, Pierre Boulez, Luigi Nono, Milton Babbitt, Charles Warren and Jean Barak were copyright-used serial techniques of one sort or another in most of their music. Other composers such as Bach copyright La Barta Cubed K, Luciano Berio, Benjamin Britten, John Cage, Aaron Copland, Olivier Messiaen, Arvo Part Currency RT, Walter Piston, Ned Rorem, Alfred Schnittke, Dmitri Shostakovich, and Igor Stravinsky used serialism only for some of their compositions or only for some sections of pieces, as did some jazz composers such as Asaf Lateef and Bill Evans. Basic definitions: serialism is a method, highly specialized technique, or way of composition. It may also be considered a philosophy of life, a way of relating the human mind to the world and creating a completeness when dealing with a subject. However, serialism is not by itself a system of composition, nor is it a style. Neither is pitch serialism necessarily incompatible with tonality, though it is most often used as a means of composing atonal music. Serial music is a problematic term because it is used differently in different languages and especially because, shortly after its coinage in French, it underwent essential alterations during its transmission to German. The use of the word serial in connection with music was first introduced in French by Rena copyright Leibowitz, and immediately afterward by Humphrey Sell in English, as an alternative translation of the German Zwar paragraph Technique 12-tone technique or Reihen music. It was independently introduced by Herbert Ehrmatt and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen into German in 1954 as serial music, with a different meaning, translated into English also as serial music. 12-tone serialism Serialism of the first type is most specifically defined as the structural principle according to which a recurring series of ordered elements are used in order or manipulated in particular ways to give a piece unity. Serialism is often broadly applied to all music written in what Arnold Schoenberg called the method of composing with 12 notes related only to one another, or dodecaphony, and methods that evolved from his methods. It is sometimes used more specifically to apply only to music where at least one element other than pitch is subjected to being treated as a row or series. In such usages post-Weberian serialism will be used to denote works that extend serial techniques to other elements of music. Other terms used to make the distinction are 12-note serialism for the former, and integral serialism for the latter. A row may be assembled pre-compositionally, or it may be derived from a spontaneously invented thematic or motivic idea. The structure of the row, however, does not in itself define the structure of a composition, which requires development of a comprehensive strategy. The choice of available strategies will of course depend on the relationships contained in a row class, and rows may be constructed with an eye to producing the relationships needed to form desired strategies. The basic set may have additional restrictions, such as the requirement that it use each interval only once. Non-12-tone serialism The series is not in order of succession, but indeed a hierarchy which may be independent of this order of succession. rules of analysis derived from 12-tone theory do not apply to serialism of the second type, in particular the ideas, 1, that the series is an intervallic sequence, and 2, that the rules are consistent. Stockhausen, for example, in early serial compositions such as Kruse-Peal and Formal, advances in unit sections within which a preordained set of pitches is repeatedly reconfigured. The composer a unregistered trademark S model for the distributive serial process corresponds to a development of the Zwar paragraph Loftenspiel of Joseph Matthias Hauer, and Guy Vaerts, in such a work as Number 4. Provides a classic illustration of the distributive function of seriality. 4 times an equal number of elements of equal duration within an equal global time is distributed in the most equable way, unequally with regard to one another, over the temporal space, from the greatest possible coincidence to the greatest possible dispersion. This provides an exemplary demonstration of the logical principle of seriality: every situation must occur once and only once. For Henri Pousseur, after an initial period working with 12-tone technique in works like Sept versets and Trois chants sacres copyright S, serialism evolved away from this bond in symphonies pour quinze solists, 1954 55, and in the quintet, a Lamar copyright Moire d'Art unregistered trademark Anton Webern, 1955, and from around the time of Impromptu, 1955, encounters whole new dimensions of application and new functions. The 12-tone series loses its imperative function as a prohibiting, regulating, and patterning authority. Its working out is abandoned through its own constant frequent presence, all 66 intervallic relations among the 12 pitches being virtually present. Prohibited intervals, like the octave, and prohibited successional relations, such as premature note repetitions, frequently occur, although obscured in the dense contexture. The number 12 no longer plays any governing, defining role. The pitch constellations no longer hold to the limitation determined by their formation. The dodecaphonic series loses its significance as a concrete model of shape is played out. And the chromatic total remains active only, and provisionally, as a general reference. In the 1960s Pousseur took this a step further, applying a consistent set of predefined transformations to pre-existent music. One example is the large orchestral work Couleurs Kreuzer copyrights, which performs these transformations on the protest song We Shall Overcome, thereby creating a succession of different situations that are sometimes chromatic and dissonant and at other times diatonic and consonant. In his opera Votre Faust Pousseur used a large number of different quotations, themselves arranged into a scale for serial treatment, so as to bring coherence and order to the work. This generalized serialism aims not to exclude any musical phenomena, no matter how heterogeneous, in order to control the effects of tonal determinism, dialectize its causal functions, and overcome any academic prohibitions, especially the fixing of an anti-grammar meant to replace some previous one. At about the same time, Stockhausen began using serial methods to integrate a variety of musical sources from recorded examples of folk and traditional music from around the world in his electronic composition to La Musique, and from national anthems in Hymnen. He extended this serial polyphony of styles in a series of process plan works in the late 1960s, as well as later in portions of Licht, the cycle of 7 operas he composed between 1977 and 2003. History of serial music. Before World War II. In the late 19th and early 20th century, composers began to struggle against the ordered system of chords and intervals known as functional tonality. Composers such as Debussy and Strauss found differing ways of stretching the limits of the tonal system in order to accommodate their ideas. After a brief period of free atonality, Arnold Schoenberg and others began exploring tone rows, in which an ordering of the 12 pitches of the equal-tempered chromatic scale is used as the source material of a composition. This ordered set, often called a row, allowed for new forms of expression and the expansion of underlying structural organizing principles without recourse to common practice harmony. 12-tone serialism first appeared in the 1920s, with antecedents predating that decade. Schoenberg was the composer most decisively involved in devising and demonstrating the fundamentals of 12-tone serialism, though it is clear it is not the work of just one musician. After World War II Serialism, along with John Cage's indeterminate music, and Werner Meyer Eppler's allegoricism, was enormously influential in post-war music. Theorists such as George Pearl codified serial systems, and his 1962 text Serial Composition and Atonality became a standard work on the origins of serial composition in the work of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. The serialization of rhythm, dynamics, and other elements of music was partly fostered by the work of Olivier Messiaen and his analysis students, including Karel Guyvanets and Boulez, in post-war Paris. Several of the composers associated with Darmstadt, notably Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, Karel Guyvanets, and Henri Pouzeur, developed a form of serialism that initially rejected the recurring rose characteristic of 12-tone technique, in order to eradicate any lingering traces of thematicism. Instead of a recurring, referential row, each musical component is subjected to control by a series of numerical proportions. In Europe, the style of some serial as well as non-serial music of the early 1950s emphasized the determination of all parameters for each note independently, often resulting in widely spaced, isolated points of sound, an effect called first in German post-tonal music, then in French musique post-tonale, but quickly confused with pointillistic, the familiar term associated with the densely packed dots in paintings of Seurat, despite the fact that the conception was at the opposite extreme. Pieces were structured by closed sets of proportions, a method closely related to certain works from the De Stijl and Bauhaus movements in design and architecture called serial art by some writers, specifically the paintings of Piet Mondrian, Theo van Doesburg, Bart van Leck, Georg van Tongerloo, Richard Paul Lochts, and Burgoyne Diller, who had been seeking to avoid repetition and symmetry on all structural levels and working with a limited number of elements . Stockhausen described the final synthesis in this manner. So serial thinking is something that's come into our consciousness and will be there forever, it's relativity and nothing else. It just says, use all the components of any given number of elements, don't leave out individual elements, use them all with equal importance and try to find an equidistant scale so that certain steps are no larger than others. It's a spiritual and democratic attitude toward the world. The stars are organized in a serial way. Whenever you look at a certain star sign you find a limited number of elements with different intervals. If we more thoroughly studied the distances and proportions of the stars we'd probably find certain relationships of multiples based on some logarithmic scale or whatever the scale may be. Igor Stravinsky's adoption of 12-tone serial techniques offers an example of the level of influence that serialism had after the Second World War. Previously Stravinsky had used series of notes without rhythmic or harmonic implications. Because many of the basic techniques of serial composition have analogues in traditional counterpoint, uses of inversion, retrograde and inversion from before the war are not necessarily indicative of Stravinsky adopting Schoenbergian techniques. However, with his meeting Robert Kraft and acquaintance with younger composers, Stravinsky began to consciously study Schoenberg's music, as well as the music of Webern and later composers, and began to use the techniques in his own work, using, for example, serial techniques applied to fewer than 12 notes. Over the course of the 1950s he used procedures related to Messiaen, Webern and Berg. While it is difficult to label each and every work as serial in the strict definition, every major work of the period has clear uses and references to its ideas. During this period, the concept of serialism influenced not only new compositions but also the scholarly analysis of the classical masters. Adding to their professional tools of sonata form and tonality, scholars began to analyze previous works in the light of serial techniques. For example, they found the use of row technique in previous composers going back to Mozart and Beethoven. In particular, the orchestral outburst that introduces the development section halfway through the last movement of Mozart's next to last symphony is a tone row that Mozart punctuates in a very modern and violent episode that Michael Steinberg called Rowed Octaves and Frozen Silences. Ruth Crawford Seeger is credited with extending serial controls to parameters other than pitch and to formal planning as early as 1930. Euro 33. Reactions to and against serialism. Some music theorists have criticized serialism on the basis that the compositional strategies employed are often incompatible with the way information is extracted by the human mind from a piece of music. Nicholas Ruedt was one of the first to criticize serialism through a comparison with linguistic structures, citing theoretical claims by Boulez and Henri Puiseux, and taking as specific examples bars from Stockhausen's Klavierster 1/4 CKEI and 2, and calling for a general re-examination of Webern's music. Ruedt specifically names 3 works as exempt from his criticism, Stockhausen's Zischmann and Gruppin, and Boulez's Le Marteau sans more registered trademarkte. In response, Puiseux questioned the equivalence made by Ruedt between phoneme and the single note. He also suggested that, if analysis of Le Marteau sans more registered trademarkte and Zischmann, performed with sufficient insight, were to be made from the point of view of wave theory taking into account the dynamic interaction of the different component phenomena, which creates waves that interact in a sort of frequency modulation this analysis would accurately reflect the realities of perception. This was because these composers had long since acknowledged the lack of differentiation found in punctual music and, becoming increasingly aware of the laws of perception and complying better with them, paved the way to a more effective kind of musical communication, without in the least abandoning the emancipation that they had been allowed to achieve by this zero state that was punctual music. This was achieved, amongst other things, by the development of the concept of groups, which allows structural relationships to be defined not only between individual notes but also at higher and higher levels, up to the overall form of a piece. This is a structural method par excellence, and a sufficiently simple conception that it remains easily perceptible. Puiseux also points out that serial composers were the first to recognize and attempt to move beyond the lack of differentiation within certain pointillist works. Puiseux later followed up his own suggestion, by developing his idea of wave analysis and applying it to Stockhausen's Zischmann in 2 essays, Puiseux 1970 and Puiseux 1997. Later writers have continued both lines of reasoning. Fred Lerdahl, for example, outlines Ruedt's subject further in his essay Cognitive Constraints on Compositional Systems. Lerdahl has in turn been criticized for excluding the possibility of other, non-hierarchical methods of achieving musical coherence, and for concentrating on the audibility of tone rows, and the portion of his essay focusing on Boulez's multiplication technique has been challenged on perceptual grounds by Stephen Heinemann and Ulrich Mosch. Ruedt's critique has also been criticized for making the fatal mistake of equating visual presentation with auditive presentation. Within the community of modern music, exactly what constituted serialism was also a matter of debate. The conventional English usage is that the word serial applies to all 12-tone music, which is a subset of serial music, and it is this usage that is generally intended in reference works. Nevertheless, a large body of music exists that is called serial, but does not employ note rows at all, let alone 12-tone technique, for example, Stockhausen's Klavierster 1/4 CKEE 4, as well as his Stimmung and Puiseux's Scambi. When serialism is not equated with 12-tone technique, a contributing problem is that the word serial is seldom if ever defined. Nevertheless, there are many published analyses of individual pieces in which the term is used, though examples are merely pointed out and the actual meaning is skated around. Theory of 12-tone serial music. The vocabulary of serialism eventually became rooted in set theory, and uses a seemingly quasi-mathematical vocabulary to describe how the basic sets are manipulated to produce the final result. Musical set theory is often used to analyze and compose serial music, but may also be used to study tonal music and non-serial atonal music. The basis for serial composition is Schoenberg's 12-tone technique, where the 12 notes of the basic chromatic scale are organized into a row. This basic row is then used to create permutations, that is, rows derived from the basic set by reordering its elements. The row may be used to produce a set of intervals, or a composer may have wanted to use a particular succession of intervals, from which the original row was created. A row that uses all of the intervals in their ascending form once is an all-interval row. In addition to permutations, the basic row may have some set of notes derived from it, which is used to create a new row, These are derived sets. Because there are tonal chord progressions that use all 12 notes, it is possible to create pitch rows with very strong tonal implications, and even to write tonal music using 12-tone technique. Most tone rows contain subsets that can imply a pitch center. A composer can create music centered on one or more of the row's constituent pitches by emphasizing or avoiding these subsets, respectively, as well as through other, more complex compositional devices. To serialize other elements of music, a system quantifying an identifiable element must be created or defined. For example, if duration is to be serialized, then a set of durations must be specified. If tone color is to be serialized, then a set of separate tone colors must be identified, and so on. The selected set or sets, their permutations and derived sets form the basic material with which the composer works. Composition using 12-tone serial methods focuses on each appearance of the collection of 12 chromatic notes, called an aggregate. The principle is that in a row, no element of the aggregate should be reused until all of the other members have been used, and each member must appear only in its place in the series. This rule is violated in numerous works still termed serial. An aggregate may be divided into subsets, and all the members of the aggregate not part of any one subset are said to be its complement. A subset is self-complementing if it contains half of the set and its complement is also a permutation of the original subset. This is most commonly seen with Heechsche chords or 6-note segments from a basic tone row. A Heechsche chord that is self-complementing for a particular permutation is referred to as prime combinatorial. A Heechsche chord that is self-complementing for all of the canonic operations inversion, retrograde and retrograde inversion is referred to as all combinatorial. The composer then presents the aggregate. If there are multiple serial sets, or if several parameters are associated with the same set, then a presentation will have these values calculated. Large-scale design may be achieved through the use of combinatorial devices, for example, subjecting a subset of the basic set to a series of combinatorial devices. Notable composers. See also, pitch interval. References, Anon. N.D. Arnold Schoenberg. Milken Archive of American Jewish Music. Banda, Marcus. 2001. Aesthetics of Total Serialism, Contemporary Research from Music to Architecture. Basel, Boston and Berlin, Berger Currency User. Bochner, Mel 1967. The Serial Attitude. Art Forum 6, No. 4, 28 €33. Basser, Jean-Yves 1989. Votre Faust, Miroir Critique. Revue Belge de Musicologie Belgische Tijdschrift voor Muziekwetenschap 43, 57 €70. Boulez, Pierre. 1954. A Euro-opera essay or loin. Cahiers de la Compagnie Madeleine Renaud de Jean-Louis Barrault 2, No. 37 €27. Reprinted in Reliever Copyright S. Euro Unregistered Trademark Apprenti, edited by Paul Thur Copyright Venin. Collection Telquel. Paris, A Permil Editions du Suil, 1966, 183 €203. Also reprinted in Points de Reparis, 3rd edition, 287 €314. Paris, Christian Bourgois, 1995. English version, as Opera Essay or Loin, in Pierre Boulez, Notes of an Apprenticeship, texts collected and presented by Paul Thur Copyright Venin, translated by Herbert Weinstock, 182 €204. New York, Alfred A. Knopf, 1968. Another English version, As Near and Far, in Pierre Boulez, Stocktakings from an Apprenticeship, translated by Stephen Walsh, with an introduction by Robert Pięcikowski, 141 €57. Oxford, Clarendon Press. New York, Oxford University Press, 1991. ISBN 0193112108. Campbell, Edward. 2010. Boulez, Music and Philosophy. Music in the 20th Century 27. Cambridge and New York, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 978-0-521-86242-4. Collot, Michel. 2008. Le Gars Copyright Nidalia. In Michel Buter, de Copyright Mar Copyright Nagements de la Litter Copyright Ratcher, edited by Myral Cali Gruber, 73 €84. Paris, Presses Sorbonne Nouvelle. ISBN 97828544176. Cope, David. 1971. New Directions in Music. Dubuque, Iowa, W. C. Brown Company. ISBN 9780697035561. Cott, Jonathan. 1973. Stockhausen. Conversations with the Composer, New York, Simon & Schuster. Delahoyde, Michael N.D. 20th Century Music. Author's website, Washington State University. Felder, David. 1977. An interview with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Perspectives of New Music 16, No. 1, 85 €101. Forte, Alon. 1964. A Theory of Set Complexes for Music. Journal of Music Theory 8, No. 2, 136 €84. Forte, Alon. 1973. The Structure of Atonal Music. New Haven and London, Yale University Press. Forte, Alon. 1998. The Atonal Music of Anton Webern. New Haven, Yale University Press. Frisius, Rudolph. 1998. Serial Music. In Die Musik in Geschichten Gegenwart, Allgemeine Enzyklopädie der Musik. Second, newly compiled edition, edited by Ludwig Fincher, Part 1, Volume 8, 1327 €54. Kassel and New York, Bar Currency Reinreiter. Stuttgart, Metzler. ISBN 978-3-7618-1109-2 ISBN 978-3-476-41008-5. Xner, Carl 1964. Designing Programs, 4 Essays and an Introduction, with an Introduction to the Introduction by Paul Gredinger. English version by D.Q. Stevenson. 2 Fenn, Switzerland, Arthur Niggli. Enlarged, New Edition 1968. Guivarets, Carol. 1994. Pariser Euro Darmstadt 1947 Euro 1956, excerpt from the autobiographical portrait, translated by Patrick Daly, Peter Visch, and Roger Janssens. Revue Belge der Musicologie / Belgische Tijdschrift voor Muziekwetenschap 48, 35 €54. Grant, Morad Josephine. 2001. Serial Music Serial Aesthetics, Compositional Theory in Post-War Europe. Music in the 20th Century, Arnold Hittall, General Editor. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 0-521-80458-2. Grant, Morad Josephine. 2006. Untitled Review of Wie Gesamtmusikalisches Strukturalismus, Rena Copyright Leibowitz, Pierre Boulez, John Cage und die Webern-Rezeption in Paris 1950, by Eng Corvisiers. Die Soziale Isolation der Neuen Musik, zum Paragraph LNER Musical Benach 1945, by Michael Custodis. Rehund System, Signaturen Day 20. Jahrhunderts. Symposiumsbericht, edited by Sabine Mein. Music and Letters 87, No. 2, 346 €52. Griffiths, Paul 1978. Boulez. Oxford Studies of Composers 16. London and New York, Oxford University Press. ISBN 0-19-315442-0. Griffiths, Paul 2001. Serialism. The New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, 2nd edition, edited by Stanley Sadie and John Tyrrell, 23 116 Euro 23. London, Macmillan Publishers. Guderian, Dietmar 1985. Serialstrukturen und Harmonikal-System. In vom Klang der Bilder, die Musik und der Kunst des 20. Jahrhunderts, edited by Karen von Marr, 434 Euro 37. Munich, Prestel Verlag. Heinemann, Stephen 1998. Pitch Class Set Multiplication in Theory and Practice. Music Theory Spectrum 20, No. 172 Euro 96. Jalowitz, Heinrich. 1944. On the Spontaneity of Schoenberg's Music. The Musical Quarterly 30, No. 4, 385 Euro 408. Keller, Hans 1955. Strict Serial Technique in Classical Music. Tempo No. 37, 12 Euro 16, 21 Euro 24. Koenig, Gottfried Michael 1999. Ästhetische Praxis, Text zur Musik, Supplement I, edited by Stefan Frick, Wolf Frobenius, and Sigrid Conrad. Quellentext der Musik des 20. Jahrhunderts 1.4. Zabra 1/4 CKEN, for Verlag, 1999. ISBN 3-89727-056-0. Cole, Jerome. 2002. Serial Composition, Serial Form, and Process in Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's Telemusik. In Electroacoustic Music, Analytical Perspectives, ed. Thomas Licata, 91 Euro 118. Westport, Connecticut and London, Greenwood Press. ISBN 0-313-31420-9. Leibowitz, Rena. Copyright 1947. Schoenberg et Son. Copyright Cole, LA. Copyright Tape Contemporain du Langage Musical. Paris. J. B. Janin, Larry, Pascal. 2008. Portrait de Lazare. Copyright Ryan June Mo. Marza Rez, Les Chasseurs Abstraits. Copyright Dieter. ISBN 978-2-35554-025-7. Lerdahl, Fred. 1988. Cognitive Constraints on Compositional Systems. In Generative Processes in Music, ed. John Sloboda. Oxford, Oxford University Press. Reprinted in Contemporary Music Review 6, No. 297 Euro 121. Lerdahl, Fred, and Rajak Endorf 1983. A Generative Theory of Tonal Music. Cambridge, Massachusetts MIT Press. Locanto, Massimiliano 2010. Karel Guivarets Euro Henry, Sigpuzer, Der Compositeurs Belges de la Nouvelle Musique. In Album Belgique, edited by Anna Maria Lasura, 151 Euro 64. Brussels, PIE Peter Lang. ISBN 978-90-5201-635-1. McInerney, Robin. 2005. Other Planets, The Music of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Lanham, Maryland, Toronto, Oxford, The Scarecrow Press, Incorporated. ISBN 0-8108-5356-6. Mead, Andrew. 1985. Large-Scale Strategy in Arnold Schoenberg's 12-tone music. Perspectives of New Music 24, No. 1, 120 Euro 57. Mayer, Leonard B. 1967. Music, the Arts, and Ideas, Patterns and Predictions in 20th-Century Culture. Chicago and London, University of Chicago Press. Morgan, Robert. 1975. Stockhausen's Writings on Music. The Musical Quarterly 61, No. 1, 1 Euro 16. Reprinted in the Musical Quarterly 75, No. 4, 194 Euro 206. Mosch, Ulrich. 2004. Musicalisches Haarparagraph Ren Seriella Music, Unterser Chungenum Beispiel von Pierre Boulez Euro unregistered trademark Elamato Sans more registered trademark Trier. Zabra 1/4 CKEN, for Verlag. Newlin, Dakar 1974. Secret Tonality in Schoenberg's Piano Concerto. Perspectives of New Music 13, No. 1 137 Euro 39. Pearl, George. 1962. Serial Composition and Atonality, An Introduction to the Music of Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. Berkeley, University of California Press. Pearl, George. 1977. 12-Tone Tonality. Berkeley, University of California Press. Puiseux, Henri. 1959. Formes pratiques musicales. Revue Belge de Musicologie 1398 Euro 116. Slightly revised and expanded version, trans. Into English as a Euro OE Music, Formen praktische Euro. Die Reef 6, 77 Euro 93. Puiseux, Henri. 1970. En guise de conclusion, pour un par copyright Rio Dicita copyright E Generalisa copyright E. In his fragments thar copyright RXI, sur la musique expert copyright Rimentale, 241 Euro 90. A Permiltudes de sociologie de la musique. Brussels, Editions de la Euro unregistered trademark Institut de sociologie Universitaire copyright Libre de Bruxelles. Puiseux, Henri. 1997. Ziet Maas, Zar copyright Rai, par copyright Rio Dicita copyright, individuation. Chapter 12 of his Musiques Croiser copywriters, preface by Jean-Yves Basseur, 171 Euro 89. Collection Musique et Musicologie. Paris, Le Matin. Ross, Alex 2007. The Rest is Noise, Listening to the 20th Century. New York, Farrar, Straus and Giroux, ISBN 978-0-374-24939-7. Rowett, Nicholas 1959. Contradictions du langage Zar copyright Riel. Revue Belge de Musicologie 13, 83 Euro 97. English trans, as a Euro OE Contradictions within the serial language Euro. Die Reef 6, 65 Euro 76. Saub, Hermann. 1977. Het musicale serialisme als techniek en als denkmethode, een onditseknadelige en historisch samenhang van de onderrieden toepassingen van het seriërend beginsel en de muziek van de periode 1950 Euro 1975. Ghent, Rijksuniversiteit te Gent. Schoenberg, Arnold. 1975. Style and Idea, Selected Writings of Arnold Schoenberg. Edited by Leonard Stein, translated by Leo Black. Berkeley and Los Angeles, University of California Press. ISBN 0-520-05294-3. Schwartz, Steve. 2001. Richard Yardemian, Orchestral Works. Classical Net. Shatskin, Merton. 1977. A Pre-Cantata Serialism in Stravinsky. Perspectives of New Music 16, No. 1, 139 Euro 43. Smith Brindle, Reginald. 1966. Serial Composition. London, New York, Oxford University Press. Steinberg, Michael 1998. The Symphony, A Listener's Guide. Oxford, Oxford University Press. Stockhausen, Karl-Heinz, and Rudolf Reisius 1998. Is Jetta for Currency RTS. In Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, Text zur Musik 9, edited by Christoph von Blumra Paragraph der, 391 Euro 512. K 1/4 TEN, Stockhausen Verlag. Strauss, Joseph N. 1999. The Myth of Serial Tyranny in the 1950s and 1960s. The Musical Quarterly 83 301 Euro 43. Sikora, Katharina. 1983. Das Verkehrungsnomen des Seriellen in der Kunst, Aspekt einer K1-Quartenslerischen Methode von Monet bis zur amerikanischen Pop Art. Wang Quarter LZBURG, K Paragraph Nyhausen plus Newman. Tick, Judith. 2001. Crawford, Ruth. The New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, 2nd edition, edited by Stanley Sadie and John Tyrrell. London, Macmillan Publishers. Where L. T. Walters, Jennifer. 1992. Michel Buter. Collection Monographie Rudopie en Litter Copyright Rajafrana Sectionnaires Contemporain 15. Amsterdam and Atlanta, Rudopie. ISBN 9789051833867. Walker, Alan. 1986. Franz Liszt, Volume 2, The Weimar Years 1848 to Euro 1861. New York, Knopf. ISBN 9780394525402. Hittel, Arnold. 2008. The Cambridge Introduction to Serialism. Cambridge Introductions to Music. New York, Cambridge University Press. ISBN 978-0-521-86341-4 ISBN 978-0-521-68200-8. WA Paragraph RNER, Carl H. 1973. Stockhausen, Life and Work, introduced, translated, and edited by Bill Hopkins. London, Faber and Faber. Berkeley and Los Angeles, University of California Press. ISBN 0-520-02143-6. Further reading, Eco, Umberto 2005. Innovation and Repetition, Between Modern and Postmodern Aesthetics. Daedalus 134, No. 4, 50 years, 191 Euro 207 doi, 10.1162/0011526057744315527. JSTOR 20028022. Far 1/4 Rustenberger, Barbara. 1989. Michel Buter's Literarische Trauerkurrency Unter Zachungen zu Meischerida Vezai bis wie Studia Romanica 72. Heidelberg, C. Winter. ISBN 9783533040705. ISBN 9783533040699. Gollin, Edward. 2007. Multi-aggregate cycles and multi-aggregate serial techniques in the music of Bach. Copyright La Barta Cubed K. Music Theory Spectrum 29, No. 2, 143 Euro 76 doi, 10.1525/MTS. 2007.29.2.143. Gredinger, Paul. 1955. Das Serial. Die Reihe 1, 34 Euro 41. English as Serial Technique, translated by Alexander Goer. Die Reihe 1, 38 Euro 44. Nee, Robin. 1985. Michel Buter's Passage de Milan, The Numbers Game. Review of Contemporary Fiction 5, No. 3 146 Euro 49. Krennick, Ernst. 1953. Is the 12-tone technique on the decline? The Musical Quarterly 39, No. 4, 513 Euro 27. Miller, Eleanor S. 1983. Critical Commentary 2, Buter's Quadruple Fond as Serial Music. Romance Notes 24, No. 2, 196 Euro 204. Run, John. 1980. Basic Atonal Theory. New York, Schirmer Books. Raudiers, Leon S. 1984. Untext Biterbi, Meischerida Raves de Michel Buter. Romanic Review 75, No. 2 242 Euro 55. Savage, Roger W. H. 1989. Structure and Sorcery, The Aesthetics of Post-War Serial Composition and Indeterminacy. Outstanding Dissertations in Music from British Universities. New York, Garland Publications. ISBN 0-8240-2041-3. Schaffman, Nathan. 1981. Serialism in the Works of Charles Ives. Tempo, New Series, No. 138, 21:32. Scruton, Roger. 1997. Aesthetics of Music. Oxford, Clarendon Press. ISBN 0-19-816638-9. Quoted in Arv-Bay, The Pleasure of Modernist Music, pages 122. ISBN 1-58046-143-3. Spencer, Michael Clifford. 1974. Michel Buter. Twain's World Author Series TWS 275. New York, Twain Publishers. ISBN 9780805721867. Wangemer Copyright E, Robert. 1995. Andra Copyright Orisala Komplexdorfer Copyright E, Ender Sara Copyright Alice May Musik Zar Copyright Real. Collection Musik, Musicology. Leah G. E., P. Mardega. ISBN 9780870096055. White, Eric Walter, and Jeremy Noble. 1984. Stravinsky. In the New Grove Modern Masters. London, Macmillan Publishers. External links, Art of the States, Serial 12-note serial and 12-note works by American composers.